There it is. Good morning. Again, Wednesday, April 30th, here in House Transportation, the last day of April. Lieutenant Ravlin is back in the chair. I think, I'm not sure if it's the first time this session, but certainly you're not a stranger to our committee. So we appreciate you coming in. There's a wide variety of items that we are going to cover, or well, at least right now we're maybe starting about tinting, but I'm sure there's quite a few others we'd love to ask you about too. So we're working on S-123 miscellaneous motor vehicles bill that came over from the Senate. And we're going to start at least in sections 38, 39, 40, 41, really all about tinting, which we spent a ton of time on last year. Difficult area. So you can.
Okay, good morning. For the record, I'm Lieutenant Paul Ravlin of the Vermont State Police. I'm the executive officer of the Special Operations Unit, and that unit includes traffic safety operations. I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Chair, to come down and speak to this bill. In reference to window tinting, yes, this has been an ongoing conversation for the last couple of sessions. And there's been a variety of opinions and presentations on it. And just a little background, we'll refer like back in the day. It was illegal, 1125, Title 23, Section 1125, which is motor vehicle law. 1125, talking about window tint, said that it was illegal to put anything on the front, left or right window and the windshield. That would be the driver window, the front passenger window, or the windshield. There were some provisions in there about different sections of the windshield that could have stickers adhered to them. One of them is your oil change sticker, 2 inches by 3 inches, upper left corner, out of the visible part. There was a shading section on the top where some windows come with a shade across the top. And there was a little bit of, there was some reference to a little bit on the bottom where they could put some stickers here and there. And then also referencing used car dealerships putting the 2024 special up in the right corner. So there was all these rules about where things could be on the windshield. And then there was also some things in place about like law enforcement vehicles or first responder vehicles that had things that would not obstruct their view, but they needed them for their job, such as mobile video cameras or radar detectors or radar units. Then we got into, there was some conversation a couple years ago about whether or not the inspection station should be held as the key, as a gate holder for failing inspections due to window tint. Was window tint a safety factor for the mechanical operation of a vehicle? It was determined that it wasn't, and that the safety inspection manual should not be the one, and the space inspection station owners should not be the ones held liable to tell a person your vehicle failed because you have the window tint because it wasn't a mechanical safety issue. Is it a safety issue? And it really depends on who you speak to. If you speak to law enforcement folks, such as a person that works with me, a crash reconstructionist, he teaches it down at the academy. He feels that it's a safety issue, not a mechanical safety issue, but an operational safety issue, where if you have a certain level of window tint, you have to roll your window down to see. He actually pulled the car over before I testified last year on a section of this. Because I asked him about it, and he had said, yeah, I pulled him over and I asked him, how can you even see? And they said, well, I got to roll my windows down. So it was so dark of tint that he had to roll his windows down. The issue that we're having last year during testimony was the fact that folks could go into an inspection station, pass, get their inspection sticker, drive out of the driveway and get a ticket. And there was some sense of it not being fair. How can we say you're good to go, but you're not good to go? Even though they were given a warning on their inspection piece of paper when you get it, there's a little note down there that says, even though you passed, you are still in violation of Title 23 and subject to penalties. Folks rolled that dice and some were getting tickets, even though they passed a vehicle inspection. Then there was some testimony last year given about how can we make that right? How can we make it so that folks can pass an inspection and not hold the inspection station mechanics as the gatekeeper saying you failed or you passed on a window tint, but also make it so that they don't get a ticket as soon as they leave the station. and there was conversations about bringing up an acceptable level of tint or how some other states do it. Florida has window tint, Georgia, a lot of southern states have window tint. How do we balance that? And there was some conversation about bringing in an acceptable level of window tint. And I think the what we settled on was 30% was what the committee settled on, and of light transmittance, right? You can't have, or 70% of light transmittance, you got 30% tint. So some of the issues with that is there's still an enforcement level to the tint. Okay, so if someone goes to a company that puts window tint on and they say, give me 5%, like give me limo tint, I don't want any light coming through. If that person gets stopped by a police officer, the police officer has to show that it's actually in violation. And we use a tint meter for that. For state police alone, for us to buy a reliable tint meter system, it's somewhere between $150 to $250 per meter for 200 troopers. So we're looking at $40,000 to $50,000 to buy a tool for us to say your tint is out of regulations. Now, there's been some testimony that we can buy a device for $30 off of Amazon, and that's true. But if I'm going to have someone's license, I'm going to have someone go into a court and have a conversation with a judge saying my window tint wasn't illegal or I shouldn't have. I need to have a device that's calibrated, that is reliable to say, yes, they were in violation. They should assess this fine or this points. Okay. So a quality device that's calibrated yearly, that is reliable, runs about $150 to $250. We're looking at $40,000 to $50,000 of expenditure. Then the training and then the constant upkeep of calibration, whatever that fee may be.
Representative McCoy?
I didn't realize that the tint didn't allow the driver not to see. I thought it was like, the sunglasses that you look like they're blue, you can't see anything, but, people looking at them, but the people who are wearing them can
Yes.
see.
Yes, there's so my son we bought my son when he got a license, we bought him a car and it came with window tint on the sides. And I drove to the intersection of my neighborhood at dusk. The sun had set, but it wasn't quite dark yet. And I was showing him, I was like, now look up the street. Can you see a kid on a bike? Can you see anything? And he's like, no. So we rolled the window down and we couldn't see out of the car. It was at dusk. So the darker the tint,
The less you see.
the less you see.
As a driver.
Correct.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Correct.
I didn't realize that.
So there is a balance that the committee, I guess, is looking to find, is like, is there an allowable limit? Is there not allowable limit? And then if there is allowable limit, what are ramifications of that? The ramifications of that really is for us, for law enforcement to enforce it in practice, is we see a violation that we suspect, that looks like it might be more than 30% tint. Then we pull the vehicle over. Now, we also, during a traffic stop, we had things like time of detention. We're on the side of the road. It's at night, it's during the daytime, whatever it may be. I get my little meter out. Now I'm metering the windows and I'm trying to determine the tint level. And then I go back and write in the ticket. If it's in violation. So we're extending the amount of time that we're detaining folks on the side of the road because we have to check the meter, the tint. And then there is another safety level that we talk about, and it's officer safety. Motor vehicle stops are generally one of the most dangerous things that law enforcement officers do, just because we do more of them than most other types of police involvements. Walking up to a car, we don't know if that person had just committed a crime, on their way to committing a crime, if they're just having a bad day. Law enforcement officers are being ambushed on traffic stops several times a year. Just a vehicle pulled over on the side of the road as a broken down vehicle, a police officer checks on it and they end up getting shot and killed. That happens frequently in the United States, let alone actual apprehensions of vehicles. On the way down here, I was purposefully paying attention to what the vehicles around me, just to have some context of what's going on. And there was several vehicles traveling northbound on the interstate with tint on their windshields. I couldn't see inside and see the operator. So I run in my neighborhood, I bicycle around town, and there's oftentimes that I can't even see inside the vehicle to see if that person who's approaching that driveway can see me. So there's a lot of safety issues that don't relate to the mechanical safety issues, the mechanical operation of the vehicle, but general operation of the operator, there is a safety issue with that. So we, as an agency, want to remain neutral in the sense of this, like we're the end user, so we aren't going to come in and plant our flag and say this must go away. It's just important for us to express our concerns on there is a safety issue, albeit not maybe not a mechanical safety issue, but there's a safety issue. There's a significant expense that the department will have to, like I said, $40,000 to $50,000 to purchase these devices, and that's not saying what all the inspection stations are going to buy. Maybe they buy the $40 one and they pass it, and then I use mine that's a little bit more money. Maybe it's more accurate, and then I fail that car, and now we have a difference of devices that we're using, and we go into court, and that has to be determined then whether or not that's something that is which one was accurate at the time, and then ultimately, I think should this go forward with the acceptable limit of 30% tint, that the best entities to be doing the reports and the studies and the outreach might not be the Department of Public Safety. We don't really have a division that really does that outreach part. I know there in the bill, it was mentioning that Department of Motor Vehicles was part of that. And then Vermont Highway Safety Office does a lot of these outreaches and studies. So they might be the better entity if it goes forward with the acceptable tint level, that they'd be the ones that would do the report or any type of public outreach or education, just because our VSP is not really set up for that type of outreach. That's kind of it as a whole. Having it fail is having it a failable piece is the easiest way to say, like, you can't have it, it's over, there's no discussion. When we do have an acceptable level of tint, we run into certain things, being able to prove it, devices, calibrated devices, or proceedings and such.
Representative McCoy.
So is the tint easily removable?
Yes, so it's put on at the companies that do this, the secondhand company, they spray on a liquid, and then they'll squeegee out the liquid and the film sticks to the window.
Okay.
Most of the film, like when I removed the tint from my son's car, you just peeled a little corner and we're able to pull it all the way across and it comes off. There was some parts that stuck a little more, a little razor blade pulls the rest of it off.
All right, thank you.
So that's how we remove it.
Representative White.
So thank you for this. So, I mean, we're hearing that this can definitely be, that tinted windows can definitely be a safety issue for drivers and also for people outside the car trying to see in. Hearing about police officers having to buy tint meters and inspection stations having to, that seems like, it seems a little useless, like a lot of money spent on these different meters. Do you see, would it be possible to have officers pull someone over if they've got tinted, a tint that looks like it's in the fail zone, and give them some type of citation warning to go check in at one of the state police barracks? I mean, we have those all over the state, and could we have a good meter at these barracks and have them go in, get an inspect, have whoever's there take a look at it, give them get out of jail free, you're good to go. You can put this in your glove box, and if you get any more issues, you've got, or get them failed. And would that be a workable scenario where we don't have to buy all these tint meters and you're sending off the road, off the highway, so an officer is not endangered and trying to go into detail?
Yeah, so the makeup of most of the towns in Vermont and generally Vermont as a whole, it's pretty rural. So if this was a town that's not Chittenden County or not Rutland County or not St. Albans City, where you have police stations that are more manned than, say, state police barracks. There's just the other day, it was myself and one admin person at the Williston barracks, because all the troopers are out on the road doing things, right? So they're, at night, it's even less. The admin's not even there. So the troopers are out on the road. There could be days where troopers don't even make it to the barracks if they're just busy driving around. So if it were an area that was predominantly patrolled by state police, that might, they might have to try to travel a distance to find a police station that has one. It might not be feasible for them to go to a state police barracks in time. Now, this does happen, like New York is that way. So if New York has a violation of a license, a light that's inoperable, they give the person the warning. And then within a certain amount of days, I've done it myself. The person come to the state police barracks, said, hey, I got this in New York. Can you prove that my light works? And I look at it, I sign it, and they mail it back. So that process does work for some municipalities, but we're extending that out. And we're putting that person, we're allowing them, we're making them do additional steps for what the police officer perceived was a violation. If it turns out to not be, this person's tried 4 or 5 days maybe to find a station that has one and someone's there. I guess it's a possibility, but I don't know if it'd be as simple as we have someone there 24 hours a day. When they show up, there will be someone there to take care of them.
Are there certain barracks that are better staffed and would typically have, or is it really?
It's all relatively the same. The barracks you're looking at a barracks of 4, maybe 5 troopers for the shift. And that's for the entire county or counties. Some barracks cover 2 counties with 4 troopers. So there might be a time where those troops don't see the barracks for a couple of days because they're just working at, our cars are our offices, and we may not ever make it in unless we get an arrest. And now we're there to process the arrestee, and then we're back out on the road again. So it's hard to say that one barracks or another would be constantly staffed. I've been in barracks where as a watch commander, and I'm the only person in the barracks for 4 or 5 hours while I'm there, or at night, so it's hard to say that, yes, if you do this, we're stopping someone saying, I believe your vehicle tint window is in violation. Here's your warning, go to the barracks. I don't know when they can get that satisfied. I don't know when that could be.
Do people ever make appointments at barracks to have?
We do have certain individuals that have mandatory requirements to show up and get a photograph. And we have one day where we say a detective will be at the barracks on this day, that month, once a month. You'll be there coming on this day at this time to get your photograph updated. But that's a detective sitting there, and that's all they're doing for that day. Because there is a requirement that these folks have to be ID'd. We have to provide that. So with a civil violation like a window tint, to be able to have a structured time, like every Tuesday, show up and we'll check your window tint. I'm not sure that's a viable option to utilize and be like, we'll take a trooper off the road for the day to check window tint.
And one last question. Does it have to be a state trooper to measure that, or could a state trooper give a citation to go get this checked and go to the DMV? We have a lot of DMV locations throughout the state. Could someone at the DMV potentially?
So I can't speak to the manpower of other agencies or other municipality units or other sheriff's departments. I couldn't speak to that. But the quick answer is any sworn law enforcement officer could probably satisfy that violation by saying, yes, I observed this with a tint meter that I had, but now I'm requiring the DMV to buy the tint meter. I'm buying the municipality to buy the tint meter. I'm requiring the sheriff's office to buy a tint meter. So just that $40,000 to $50,000 would just BSP. That's not Essex PD, Burlington PD, Rutland City PD, Rutland Town. That's not all the other PDs out there and other sheriffs out there that have to work on their annual budgets and their equipment and all the stuff that they have to go to their towns and ask money for. So I couldn't tell you that they would even have the equipment.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a way that
Absolutely.
could buy 10 of these, not 50 or 100, and not have your team having to do this on the highway.
No, I appreciate that. And that's trying to be, fiscally sound about it. It's just the way state troopers work. Every trooper's car They each have handheld PBTs for DUIs. They each have their own radars. They each have their own lasers. They each have all their own stuff in each car because they could end up 40 miles from a barracks, and that's where they spend the next 8 hours of their shift. And they have to operate out of that barracks. So each car is basically a roaming office for VSP.
Thank you.
Representative Wells and then Representative Casey.
Who's putting on that tin? Is that a factory tin the kids are putting on the cars or garages are doing it at request?
There's a few companies
Okay,
that sell, some aftermarket companies that put window tint on. And we always get that question, well, why can they put that on if it's against the law? Well, there's a lot of things that we have in place where you can buy and purchase and use and have that doesn't necessarily meet Vermont law. You can buy aftermarket blue headlamps, and those are a violation. You can buy aftermarket red headlamps. Those are against Title 23. I'm the commander of the bomb squad team. You can go and buy fireworks at any one of the several fireworks places. The second you drive out of the parking lot, you're going to be charged with possession of explosives because you don't have a permit. So there's a lot of things that we allow to have happen for capitalism, but it doesn't necessarily meet that meets Vermont statute, like in violation.
so the factory machinery, is that up to your standard?
So there are some vehicles that come factory tint, and those too would be in violation by having the window tinted in the front and left window. Now, let me back up. Our statute states something adhered to or blocking the vision of the operator. So it would be in violation of shading of our current or of the projected thing more than 30% if it passes. But I would have to say that some vehicles now are coming from the factory with a 30% tint on it already. That's what some of it has to do with emissions control because they're trying to keep the temperature of the car inside cooler, so you don't use your AC as much, so we don't use as much emissions, right? So there are some companies that are sending them out of the factory with 30% tint already. Greater than that would be in violation.
So we need a tougher law there. I can't imagine, trying to pick up somebody and you don't know what they're doing inside the truck or the car when they're going beside you. They might be drinking a rum and coke. Maybe they're smoking a spliff. It's really hard to tell. And it seems like we got to be tougher on the level and help you guys out. And you want to see who's on those vehicles. So you really need a law that just mandates you go down to 28% tint or whatever, so you can see in those vehicles, front and sides.
For the officer safety piece and general vulnerable user piece, to us, there's an issue, and that's going to segue into later on what we're going to be speaking about, right? But and again, to the point that the lieutenant that I spoke with, who teaches crash investigation, he pulled the vehicle over and said, "How can you even see?" And they're like, "Well, I roll my window down." It's like, well, at -4 in February, you're not rolling your window down, right? So
It's frozen shut.
so there's that balance. We have to strike that balance. But if we're telling folks that you're able to pass an inspection, go about your business, and the second they pull out of that driveway, there's a cop sitting there and is going to give them a ticket for that exact violation, even though they know they're being told. That was the issue that we're trying to balance last year. Like, how can we say you're okay, but you're not okay? So it came up with this 30% piece. I don't know. That's for the committee to decide if that's what we go forward with. But if it does go forward with that, there is a lot more things down the road that we're talking about, like to timeline detention on the side of the road. If we try to do a satellite locations, purchasing these things, is everyone buying the same one? So we're all calibrated the same. There's a lot of things. And when I'm standing in front of a judge and the defendant is protesting the ticket and they're saying, well, I went to this person and they said I'm fine, and he said I wasn't, then the judge has to decide which one he listens to, so.
Yeah, you need a uniform there, but you guys got to be able to see in the vehicles. So the tint is just too dark. We got to do something about that. Lighten it up so you can see in rigs.
Representative Casey, you're up.
I agree with Ken on that. And I personally, and I'm sure a lot of people feel this way, $40,000, $50,000 is a small amount to pay, so you guys have an extra tool in your war chest. You know,
It's,
I think it is.
it's $40,000 or $50,000 is a significant when it comes to our budget though, when we're talking about budgeting another piece of equipment that we have to maintain. So our radar devices in our cars are calibrated before and after every shift. And we testify to that in court. Our PBTs, our handheld PBTs that we're making arrests on, those are calibrated once a month. These devices that I'm gonna tell someone that if you don't pay this ticket, your license is going under suspension. It's pretty significant. You're getting a fine, you're getting points. That has to be calibrated. So there's just all these things that we're now, just another layer of things that I think if we look at a 10,000 foot budget and we're like, oh, if your budget is $80 million, what's $50,000? $50,000 comes down to it's a pretty significant when we're talking that it $50 or $80 million gets used up to the penny every year, and we're adding another layer of stuff without any appropriations. Like that's coming out of EPS budget, right? Coming out of our pocket to pay for that. So that's a significant hit for us to take that. Yeah.
Representative McCoy, did you still have a question?
Yeah, so just so I'm clear, it's the driver's side and passenger side front windows. The back windows, like in a sedan, those back two windows cannot be tinted. Is that what you're saying? Or can they all be tinted?
The opposite. So the front windows.
Yep.
Where the driver sits.
Yep.
The driver's window and the front passenger's
Yep.
window, and then sections of the windshield cannot be tinted.
Okay,
Okay.
well, that's pretty much what most cars that I see are tinted.
This bill is authorizing a level of 30% tint. So there's 70% of the light has to come
Okay.
through.
Okay, so currently, any tinted car, any windshields that are tinted in the state of Vermont currently are in violation.
That will always be in violation, even if this passes. Tinted windshields will still be violated, but there are tinted windows,
Front
windshields,
passenger front windows cannot be tinted.
to a certain level.
To
30%.
With this proposal.
Yes.
Okay.
The back windows, your back window, your back passenger and back driver window, they can be tinted,
Okay,
and they can be tinted. You can take black paint, and black it out if you wanted to, providing that your exterior mirrors are still in place. Okay, your outside mirrors on your driver doors, they have to be in place and usable. That way you can see behind you. If those mirrors don't exist, you can't have your back windows tinted.
okay.
In effect, driving it was a
Standard
standard.
Correct, yep, yeah, my truck that I drive right now has a cap on the back. I can't see out my rear mirror, but I got my side mirrors. They have to be there and work.
Representative Keiser, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. When I think of tinting, I think of avoidance and hiding. So I don't trust it when I see it. Manufacturers tinting though, is that always 30%? Is there a standard that manufacturers have?
I don't know that answer, sir. I don't know what that is, but I am aware that some tint is coming at the 30%. I don't know if it's more than that. I don't know.
And we don't know, and I wonder, do we know that if a manufacturer will certify what their tinting is?
I don't know that answer
Yeah,
either.
okay, so that's an open issue. But this could be easily solved, in my way of thinking, is if you require any manufacturer delivering vehicles into Vermont or being sold in Vermont to have only manufactured tinting at 30% and allow no aftermarket. Does that make sense to you?
Well, the short answer is yes, because I like to have the no tint, but we do currently have the current law states you can have tinted windows. It's just not a failable inspection
Mhm.
violation. We can pull people over and give them tickets for that, for having a tint. And then they can remove it or not, or they just drive down the road and get another ticket. It's up to them. So having no tint from an officer safety standpoint, yes, I like that piece. There are provisions in place for folks that need a level of tint, folks that are receiving like chemotherapy, that they can't have the sun rays on them, folks that have vision issues, they need to have a certain level of tint. And they can go to their physician or optometrist and they can get a little sticker that they stick on their windshield. Now, that's another whole conversation in itself. The sticker's about this big and I got to see it at moving speeds, but whatever. They stick it on their windshield and they say, I've seen a physician, the physician says, I need a certain level of tint. And it's good, they're good to go. They can travel on. So there have been times where we pulled cars over, see the sticker, it's like, oh, okay, you're free to go. And I think that was the basis of some of the conversation way back when they're trying to get it accepted, is that, well, if certain people are allowed, how come certain people are not? Just now, we have completely blacked out cars, like blacked out. There's a car driving north on the interstate this morning, couldn't see the passenger through the front windshield or the side window, it was black all around. So it's just gotten to that point that if it's like, hey, if it's not failable, I'm just gonna push my luck and see if a police officer is gonna pull me over, and that's where it's gotten to. And then it's police officers have a lot of things on their plate, and then seeing another car with another tinted window and stopping and seeing that there is this kind of back and forth. Police officers too are feeling like, wait a minute, if we're not failing you for this, like, is it the most valuable part of my time to now stop you and get this? And some people can deem it as like, most of our young kids or car enthusiasts, like, you're harassing me now because I have tinted windows and I didn't get it failed. But now you're harassing me, that type of thing. So trying to have that educational piece with folks in the community, and law enforcement not being heavy-handed, and, going after having our traffic stops be 60, 80,000 traffic stops a year, and half of those are for window tint, right? It's just like, where's our priorities at? So into that is a balance that we have to strike. It's for law enforcement piece.
Representative Pouch?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming. And, we had this discussion, I think last year.
Yes.
So I think what you're telling us is that window tinting in excess of the 30 or 70%, however we measure it, is a danger. It's a concern for officers. And I'll attest, it's a concern when I pull up to a four-way stop and I can't see what that person's not making any eye contact. Right? On a bicycle, same thing. I don't know what's going on. But what you're also saying is this is nearly impossible to enforce if you're allowed to pass inspection. And now it's unreasonable to expect Department of Public Safety to be the ones to enforce this by yourselves with the tools that you have.
That'd be correct. It's for last year's committee, we're sending the mixed messages. One entity, a state inspection agency, is saying, you're good to go. Like, you're in violation of Title 23, but I'm not going to fail you. And the second you leave, another state agency, law enforcement, is pulling you over and giving you a ticket for the thing that we just warned you about at the inspection station. So preferably, if we're going to have an accepted level of tint on the windows, it would be back to like inspection stations aren't going to fail it. Police officer will pull you over and give you a ticket. Back to the way it was after the original change. The easiest way is to have it way back when, aging myself, when it was just illegal altogether. Like, you just couldn't have it. You're in violation. There's no question. I don't need a tint meter. I'm not delaying you any longer on the side of the road long enough to write you a ticket, and you go about your way. That ultimately, that was the easiest way. And then it got moved to not a failable offense or inspections. We accept that, we move on, but now the onus is on the operator, and they're going to be in that back and forth of like, this guy said I'm okay, but I'll get a warrant, I'll get a warning. This officer's giving me a ticket 10 minutes later. So
just to follow up. So I believe we had testimony too last year that manufacturers of vehicles, sort of follow that 30% rule that now I don't know if that's every vehicle, but pretty much, that's sort of a standard out there. So potentially you could say, hey, no added tinting. And I guess that would be something that would be easy to see. It appears, they seem obvious when it's added. That doesn't help out-of-state cars, but
yes.
That's another story, I guess.
That could be, an observable violation that doesn't require any additional tooling. However, if I'm giving the person the ticket, I need to prove in front of a judge that their tint is beyond that 30%. If we have an acceptable level,
Yes.
I have to prove in court that it's that level or less. I can't have well, I think that's what this is. I have to show evidence that, yes, this person was in violation of this because of that. Now, if the person comes in and says, well, it's factory tint, as a law enforcement officer, I don't know what that is. Maybe that factory added, maybe it's 40%, maybe it's, I don't know that. So just the observation alone is difficult to have provable evidence in court versus a device telling me this is it.
So sounds like the best way to go is no tint at all, unless the doctor gives you the thumbs up.
That's the easiest way, the way it used to be. However, now we're running into putting that onus back on inspection station, saying you failed your inspection due to window tinting being, and I don't want to speak out of turn for my Department of Motor Vehicle colleagues, but their focus on the inspection manual is mechanical safety. And the inspection stations failing a vehicle for window tint, they didn't feel that it was a mechanical safety issue. They didn't say it wasn't an operator safety issue or an operation safety issue. They said, we want the inspection stations to fail it for mechanical issues, not for the other operational safety issues, right? So that's where we got into where we are now, trying to have this, we're not going to fail you for a mechanical violation. However, there is a law that you're in violation of, and they gave them the warning on that. And then they got held accountable for that. So I don't know how you and where that falls into place of saying, is it just the law that's not part of the manual? Is it just, I don't know the answer. But
Sounds like to me, it should be done at the inspection station just the same, even though it's not a actual mechanical issue, but it's like, it'd be real easy for the guy walking, oh, it's got tinted windows, you're done, and that's that.
yeah.
That sounds cheap.
And you run in violate sometimes, I've had conversations as well with other colleagues of mine in other agencies saying, if you roll into an inspection station and the person goes in on a July afternoon, he has both his front windows down, and that inspection station manager doesn't roll the windows up to see if they're tinted, and he walks out of there with tinted. There's all kinds of ways around it, right?
Oh.
But it's not up to me to state that I think it should be in the inspection manual. I'm aware on the reason for the changes, that it's not based on a mechanical safety issue, so I can appreciate that piece. However, we then went the other way, and not putting the onus on the inspection station supervisor, but saying like, you are in violation just because it took them out of that piece of saying you failed and it not being a mechanical failure reason for that safety.
I was just thinking of simplification.
It was, yes,
I'm listening to what you're saying, it's like, I hear the way to fix this.
I did, right, and where do we put that? Does that go back to the inspection manual, which I think some folks would be against that, right? Because of what we're trying to do with the inspection manual. I know there's some conversations about trying to get away from inspections and try to extend them out every 2 years and certain things, but if it's not a part of the inspection manual because it's saying that it's not a mechanical safety issue, so we're not going to inspect that piece, but it is still a law violation, that makes it easier, takes the onus off the inspection stations, but it doesn't make them say that you are failing for a non-mechanical safety issue.
Representative Wells?
What year did they change that from having no tint to allowing it now? What year did they do that?
I think it's been a couple of years. I don't know the exact date. I think the commissioner might be able to speak more to that. I don't know off the top of my head. It's 3 or 4 years.
Say 2019,
So since about then.
So it hasn't been in place very long.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It's not long.
Should go back to the simpler way then.
That's
But in Montpelier, we don't like to go the simple way.
Yeah,
not for me to decide. I'm just giving you the practice piece of it on how it's actually, as an end user to this, how it's in place. If it's how it currently is, and it's repealed back to inspection stations and won't fail it, but you still be in violation of Title 23 and get a ticket. We've been doing that for the last 5 or 6 years. If it went all the way back in the day and there was no acceptable level of tint and you will fail an inspection, there's gonna be some conversation on that, about whether or not that it should lie within the inspection manual and the station, because now you're telling them they're failing for a non-mechanical violation, safety violation. So that's the problem where it lies there, which I see the argument for both. Like, why are we telling a guy, this mechanic, saying, yes, fail him for a non-mechanical piece? He's here for brakes, suspension, rust, things like that, working headlights. Is that where that should lie? I can see the argument for both ways, right? I can see both sides of that coin. So,
So barring any other quick question on that, we got to move to the next topic of 2 sides to every, or 7 sides to every story. We're gonna- If you're good to go to the next piece on the amendment or potential amendment that's proposing to being added to the miscellaneous motor vehicles law, we're calling it, right now it's Representative Pouch has a piece that he would like to add to the bill, and we asked you to come in and speak to bicycle related.
yes,
You want-
Changes
go ahead
to,
and-
changes to intersections.
yes,
And I know you're a bicyclist, so it'd be interesting to get your
yes.
sort of opinion, and also, you know, how, what kind of enforcement have you seen around this? And so your opinion.
Yes. So I can appreciate the efforts, certainly of the committee and Representative Pouch's effort to make bicycling safer, right? The person who sold me my road bike was actually hit and killed in Heinsberg. And I investigated that crash for Heinsberg, right? So the gentleman that just helped me buy my bike a couple of months before, I'm now investigating his death in a crash on a bicycle, right? So that night I go home on my bike and I went 20 miles just because I had to, right? So I understand the safety behind cycling and vehicles and the push to use more bicycles and such. A couple of things that stand out about this bill. I was part of the committee that did some of the study on it. I read the Idaho stop. Connecticut did a study on it as well, as if they were going to put it in there. There's probably been, at the time I was reading it, there's probably like 17 or 18 states that had adopted some form of the Idaho stop, which was using stop signs, red lights, and flashing red lights as yield signs. Okay. Initially, my approach to this is like, I don't ever want to put a bicycle up against the vehicle in any way, at any intersection, at any time. We spend a lot of time and money in teaching drivers how to drive cars through driver's education. There's private driver's education. There's nothing for a bicyclist. If I go down to the store and buy a bike right now, I can drive on the road and ride a bike. There's no course I have to take, rules of the road or anything. You just drive your bike. So there's some concern to me that we're starting to mix up the signals at an intersection when everyone's taught the same way. And then you look at it a little bit more and you're like, okay, well, we're trying to clear those intersections quicker and we're trying to get bicyclists away from these motor vehicles faster. One of the things that stand out to me in this bill proposal is that using the stop sign and the flashing red light as a yield sign would only take place if no other vehicles were approaching or in the intersection. So then I wonder why we're doing this when no one else is around. It's almost like an integrity check on bicyclists, right? Because if there's a vehicle there, they have to abide by the current laws. So if I'm sitting there, what it seems like we're trying to do is we're trying to make it that if there's a police officer sitting at an intersection and no other cars were approaching and a bicyclist used that stop sign as a yield sign, he wouldn't get pulled over for not stopping at the stop sign. Because if there are other cars there, everyone has to abide by the current laws. That's how I'm interpreting this, and I may be wrong. So if, you know, there's a study done by NHTSA, National Highway Safety Transportation, about bicycle crashes. They did them for about a 10-year study. The most recent one I saw was in 2001. United States as a whole had about 966 fatal bicycle crashes in the entire country. Okay. And then they break it down to intersections in rural and urban. You know, and approximately what I have right here, you know, an estimated 18% of those fatal bicycle crashes involved the bicyclist being impaired. The other 16% were the drivers being impaired. involved in the fatal crashes at bicycles at intersections. And then a piece that stuck out to me the most was out of the 966 crashes. And by the way, in 2022, we had 0, or 2021, we had 0, which was the year this study was published. So we looked magnificent on their study charts because we had no bicycle fatalities that year. However, 29% of those 966 were at intersections. The other 62% were not in intersections. And then and then there's an other, like a 9% there. Most of them involved males, most of them involved pickup trucks. Those were the significant things that stuck out to me for bicycle fatalities. In Vermont, we averaged 1 fatality a year, with the exception of last year. We had 2. 2021, we had 0. So for the last 6 years, we had 1 fatality per year. Now, I don't want to get to a number to where this committee has to come in and say, we need to do something about bicycle safety, right? So I'm grateful that we're taking the proactive steps, and I'm seeing infrastructure change with bicycle lanes being put in, wider shoulders being put in. My bike rides take me out to the countryside of like Westford and Underhill and stuff. So some of those roads are good, some of those roads are not so good. I'm just trying to figure out how law enforcement can enforce that section of the bill. If there's cars present and bicyclists still have to operate the same, then we're not clearing them from traffic as quickly as we want because they have to stop and unclip. And if they're by themselves and there's no one else around, then they are it's the integrity check that they stop when no one else is around. And the police officer hiding in the bushes being like, I got you, you didn't stop. So that's what I'm trying to balance that information out. So I as a whole, we kind of, law enforcement being the end user of this bill, I would say from VPS position, we would kind of remain neutral because it doesn't change a lot in our perspective. There's not a lot of tickets written to cyclists. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is for a police officer to write a ticket, it's an observable, reasonable suspicion violation by the officer. So I observe someone violating Title 23 by law enforcement officer, reasonable suspicion. If it was something like a school bus, red lights going through the school bus and the police officer wasn't there, and the school bus driver calls me and says, hey, car ABC 123 ran the red lights on my bus. And I go run them down and I say, hey, were you on this road? Yes. Did you see the school bus? Yes. Did you see the red lights? Oh, I don't know if I saw them or not. Well, the school bus driver said you did. Here's your ticket, but I can't prosecute that ticket in court. I will go as the issuing officer, but the school bus driver now is essentially the prosecutor for that ticket. They have to come to court with me and they say their piece to the judge. And I just tell the judge, this is what I did. And then the judge will determine whether or not that violation stands. Same thing would go with the bicycle violations. If I hear that a bicycle, most of the time we'll get, well, these bicycles are riding free abreast, so these bicycles are doing this, or these bicycles are doing that. I hunt down the bicyclists, say, hey, if I can ID them and say, hey, were you doing this? And they're like, no, I don't think so. It's a non-observed violation by a police officer. It's hard for us to issue those violations. So if it happened at an intersection where the police officer wasn't present, I would have to take that operator, find that bicyclist, and have those two discuss it at court with me being the middleman of issuing the ticket. Does that make sense? So as far as the enforcement piece goes, there's not a whole lot of cyclists being issued tickets by police officers as a state as a whole. I don't have the numbers. Excuse me, but when we were doing the study, VTrans did a study on this. They've issued a report, and the numbers were relatively low on the number of tickets, if any. I can't remember, that were issued to cyclists.
Let me ask you a question. So you bicycle and you come to a 3-way stop sign in rural, Underhill.
Yes.
And you don't see any cars. Do you stop and put your foot down, or do you just sort of slow down? You don't see anything, and then,
How I practice is I don't come unclipped. I stay clipped in. I kind of come to nearly a stop, balancing. I'm looking, and then if it's clear, I'll start, powering out of the stop. But it's not a complete stop, and I don't unclip. If there's no one around, but I'm at a near stop where I feel that if I had an approaching vehicle or some sort of like something that's gonna cause me to be injured, I could immediately stop. I'd probably fall over because I'd be clipped in, but I would come to a stop before having that hazard impact me, right? Whatever it may be, because certainly we're pretty rural here in Vermont. Some cities like Burlington have ordinances that allow bicyclists to do these certain things already, and there's nothing precluding towns from having ordinances of doing this. They're saying, hey, the ordinances can be put in place where you can use stop as yield, you can cross on crosswalks, you can do that. There's nothing federally that prevents that from happening either. The federal for sidewalk or crosswalk designs and signage and all that, there's nothing preventing ordinances being put in place for bicyclists to use those things. They just have to yield to pedestrians and folks using wheelchairs and blind with sight issues. But they can use crosswalks and such. So some of that stuff is in existence already. But I don't have the data to say that this was such a position where law enforcement needs to take a step in because there's so many bicyclists blowing intersections, or there's so many bicyclists aren't allowed to cross roads because there's so much traffic and they need to be. I don't have that data to support that. That needs to change. Although I am glad that bicycle safety is something that is constantly being reviewed as. I'm just trying to figure out how this particular wording in this particular instance impacts like law enforcement, other than saying law enforcement is making sure that bicyclist Paul Ravelin came to a complete stop in the middle of Underhill with no cars around, because that's what the law says, I just don't know that that's happening.
Yeah, well, wouldn't it be, taking no real position on it one way or the other? Wouldn't it though simplify everything for law enforcement if the rules were the same in every town in Vermont? Where in Burlington, I didn't know that, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, that I can, look at a stop sign as a yield, and being a bicyclist, a smart bicyclist doesn't take any chances.
Yes.
You don't win that
You
war.
lose every time.
Yeah. And so that, okay, I can slow down. Obviously, nobody there. I can just keep going. I don't have to stop. Some people on cliff do that. It seems like when you have the same rules in every town, seems like it's simpler for everybody. And
Yes.
also, if that's the rule, then the education becomes maybe simpler. Or
Yes,
easier.
I agree. If there's one umbrella that says if there's no approaching vehicles from any direction, and the only people that happen to be at that intersection is a law enforcement officer and a cyclist, and that cyclist uses that stop sign as a yield sign, or that flashing red light as a yield, and they safely traverse the intersection, if that is a standing rule for everyone, then yes, that's easy to enforce or not enforce, because we're just like, all right, well, it's happening.
Yeah.
I was in preparation for this, paying attention to cyclists as a civilian driving my personal vehicle, so you don't stand out and everyone behaves as they should when there's a police officer around. And folks are kind of doing that right now anyway. They're kind of coming up to the intersection and they're doing that rolling, and I was the third car back, and the bicyclists kind of did their thing with the car. So the car goes straight, the bicyclists go straight with the car. That technically is a violation because it's, you're not in line with traffic rules, right? But it's kind of happening anyway. So if there was a overall arching umbrella saying, emphasizing no approaching or vehicle traffic in the intersection already. So essentially just leave the bicyclists or bicyclists by themselves. The off chance that there might be a police officer there enforcing that particular violation, then yes, that makes sense to me. Easy, right? And then the education piece on top of that. And then with that segue into education is like, I think the offices for that would be Vermont VTrans, who did the study. And speaking to the folks that were part of the study, they reached out to me and said, hey, we want to be part of this education piece. So that makes sense. And then the Vermont Highway Safety Office, they do the education and the outreach. Again, going back to the window tint piece, I'm not sure that DPS were just not set up for that education blast. We can support them and say, yes, what they're doing, we support that. But for us to be spearheading the study and the report later on, we're just not designed for that piece. We can assist them in technical assistance on how they need on their reports with our data. But to have us be the gatekeepers for that report, that we might not be the best entity for that.
Just one more little follow-up. Sure. Not to impress you, but for many years, I would be the one that would stop. And there's nobody there
Right.
because my thought process was, I don't want anybody to see me breaking the rules, and now they're gonna get angry at bicyclists.
Yeah.
And so there was always this sort of conflict. And I would say over the last 3 years, I've sort of looked at it a little differently and get myself into intersections in Burlington or busy intersections and say, gee, if I could hit the crosswalk button and go with the crosswalk, I can clear this complicated intersection. So that's also in this
Yes,
amendment.
yes,
And also if, there was education out there that said, hey, it's allowed to not have to stop, put your foot down.
yes, and that makes complete sense. And and again, if it's umbrella to the entire state saying that bicycles can use crosswalks and, the way they're going to traverse intersections with stop and flashing red lights, it makes sense in the sense of bicycle safety. From a department position, we're not going to say, yes, definitely do this, or no, definitely don't do this, just because there's not a significant piece of enforcement from law enforcement saying, we're writing X amount of tickets that are now going to go away, or we're not writing any tickets that we're now going to have to write. It's just not enough of that happening where we can take a significant stance one way or the other. From a 10,000-foot view, having everyone all understanding the same thing makes sense. It reduces
You
confusion.
spend more time doing tinted windows that way.
More time to the windows.
I guess my question to you is just philosophically, where do you draw the line? How about e-bikes that go up to 30 miles an hour? How about a moped? It's the same concept, nobody's there, we just go.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line that theoretically this is a good, thing to do?
So the way that NHTSA is defining, the folks in their study, they're calling them pedal cyclists. And those are folks using human power to move. They even go down to like a unicycle. So a unicycle, bicycle, or tricycle under human power. And that's who's coming into this study and how they want to study vulnerable users in crosswalks. They're not including e-bikes. They're not including any gas-powered vehicles. It's human-powered pedal cyclists is how they're referring to those.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but conceptually, we're just saying if nobody's there, why not allow these other ones? Any.
I know now,
Why not? Nobody's there.
but we get into now we expand that to motorcycles and other cars and other trucks, right?
That's my point.
Yes, I
Exactly.
100%, right? I get that. And that's unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's where the committee, that's where you
Yeah.
folks come in to say, hey, this is where we're going to draw that line. But you're absolutely right. If we allow this, then this. It's happening with the window tint.
Yeah.
We're allowed this and now we're up to 90% tint and
Yeah.
no one can see in or out. So it's that same way, right? It's that snowball effect. So I believe that if there is conceptually, if there's an acceptance to this, that the definition of that person who can use that is limited to what we're trying to keep safe. And those are the people that are the most vulnerable and the folks that are on the bicycles that have to start from a standing stop or unclip and reclip, or folks that are using the crosswalks, which we have to yield to, everyone has to yield to anyways. If there was a person in a wheelchair or a person walking or visually impaired, that cyclist would then have to yield to those people as well, even though they're allowed to use the crosswalks too. We had a violation in Title 23. We reviewed all of Title 23 a couple of years ago, page by page, violation by violation, all of them. And there's a violation that we made it mandatory in Vermont that you had to use the right-hand side of the crosswalk, not just the crosswalk, but the right-hand side. And they're like, well, this is silly. How can you violate that? Well, the violation was for visually impaired. So that folks who were visually impaired understood that there was not going to be anybody in front of them because they were on the right-hand side of the crosswalk, right? So once you dig into the reasonings behind certain things, you're like, understand why it's there. So there's a hierarchy to all that. And I think that if there is an acceptance to this, that it has to be clearly defined, that it's gonna be some sort of human-powered pedal cyclists that these are doing, and that's it. Because next thing you know, it is a motorcycle, it is a car, it is a truck. Why do I need to stop if they don't?
Representative Tomlinson.
Actually, I'm all set.
Okay, Representative Beason.
It's, have you ever issued anybody a ticket on a bicycle?
I have not.
I mean, I gotta admit, when I'm out riding my bicycle, if I don't see anybody around, I just roll across. And do you have a little attaboy sticker you can get for Mr. Pouch?
You know, I appreciate, you know, it's almost like a karma approach, right? If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, something bad's gonna happen to me, right? Something could happen. And then if by chance you went to the intersection and there is someone speeding and now it's your fault because you were there, I get that. I appreciate that, you know? And there's still a level of it that at no time ever will a bicycle win against a 3,000, 4,000, 7,000 pound vehicle. Ever, never. It never will happen. So again, initially when I hear this, my initial response is no way, no how. But with the emphasis on no approaching or vehicles present, that adds a level of safety that is a little bit more acceptable because we're not having that.
Great. Run out of time. Representative Allen?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak, especially in favor of the allowing cyclists to cross with the crosswalks. I think there's a real, like, just legibility to that makes a lot of sense to many people. And I know in my community, it would certainly help encourage vulnerable users, which by and large in our community are kids that we're trying to encourage to, you know, walk and ride to school. And they're very anxious parents, you know, to allow them to do that. So it's a lot of kids in my town that have to cross Route 7. And I think we've got pretty good, you know, crossing guards, et cetera. We've got pretty good measures in place in a few designated locations, but still there's that barrier. So I think this could really help with that. And then we'd be helping to introduce more kids to, you know, the joys of getting around without, you know, having to use a car all the time. So that just seems to make intuitive sense to me. And, you know, other places I've seen, this could be something with our Vermont state standards coming online, is, you know, there'll be a little decal that flashes with the signaled crosswalks that has a little, like a bicycle can go. It makes it even clearer. So there's things we could do if we.
I think we're making some strides in the right direction, and there's a whole slew of bicycle signals and stuff, right? That other towns, we talked about bike boxes last year, bike lanes,
Yeah.
the bike boxes in the front allowing the bicycles to congregate there on a stop. So there are certain things that progressively we can keep going towards for bicycle safety. I just want to make sure you mentioned children and stuff, and if we're telling children, you know, the little thing, stop on green and not in between type thing, right? Or go on green, not in between, and things like that. Like, I wouldn't want my young son at 10 or 12 years old understanding that he can dictate that he can use a stop sign on a yield at an intersection because that's the law, right? Like, we have to make sure that the education piece is significant, because now it's not a seasoned cyclist, someone who cycles a lot, who doesn't want to unclip and who doesn't want to, it's a child who's like, well, it's a yield, I don't have to stop for the stop sign, right? So when we make these decisions, we got to understand it's almost to the lowest common denominator, which is the most uneducated person, which most of the time is children. So the education piece will be significant as to how cyclists use intersections.
And well, maybe with our revamped school system, we can get some education as part of.
There's a lot of locomotions. They're constantly want to get that message out.
Yeah.
Kid program. When we find the funding for our Bike for Every Kid program.
Yes.
Representative White, I think you had your hand up.
I did, real quick, thank you. Can you remind me, is a bicyclist right now prohibited from using a crosswalk? Unless they are
I
on
didn't-
foot, because I tend to use them. when I'm
Yeah, I
crossing
didn't
this
read
road.
the crosswalk. I didn't read the crosswalk violation, Title 23, so I don't know the exact answer. Saw a head nod up that way.
I believe so.
I can look that and get that back to the committee. I don't know off the top of my head. But again, there's nothing stopping any town or municipality from using those federally or otherwise. It just says you can put those ordinances in place and rightly so designed for that, except for they must yield to the more vulnerable user.
Right, and as a police officer, you're not looking to ticket bicyclists who are using the crosswalk to cross the street, are you?
I'm not.
Yeah.
No, not even because I'm a cyclist either. It's not that. And when I say cyclist, please, it's like a weekend warrior thing. I'm not, no, no Tour de France in my future, but no, there are cyclists that do push envelopes and cause issues. And the same thing to the point earlier, it's like, well, I don't want to be the reason that I'm now a motorist is mad at a cyclist, right? So, but no, I haven't.
So if there is not a lot of enforcement going on, per se, and we look at changing the rules, where it does come in, or what rules related to the bicycle is after the accidents that you mentioned, whether they're fatalities or not, if there's accident involved, I suppose everybody that's involved in the accident has to be gone back to see whether they were or were not following the rules in that intersection or that accident happened. How does this potential change impact an accident investigation that involves a bicyclist and whether they did or did not properly determine whether there was traffic in the intersection or piece? Because you're not doing enforcement, but you're certainly going to have to do investigation.
Absolutely.
How does this impact that?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I appreciate you asking that. And yes, if there's a bicycle crash with an injury or fatality, we're going to have to determine what the circumstances are. And if it is the violation of the cyclist entering the intersection with approaching hazards, they would be in violation of that. They'd be in violation if this bill passed. They'd be in violation of that because of approaching hazards. They must utilize the intersection as current laws state as a vehicle. They would have to come to a complete stop and let the hazard pass.
My dad grew up in Chicago, and if you got in an accident with the bus, it didn't matter what you did or didn't do, it was definitely your fault, even if the bus was at accident. I just am curious if we give that much of a leeway, doesn't it put them at fault all the time? If
I don't-
they didn't get through the intersection. I'm not sure that's a real fair question. It's really scary about, or not scary, just it concerns me about the only time there's going to be enforcement is when there's an accident.
That was a big part of my initial take on this was like, why are we changing rules to potentially put bicyclists at harm? The biggest piece that we can get on board with is that there's nothing else. There's no other vehicles in place. Just because you'll never win, right? We talked about that. But if there is a violation, just like any fatal or injury crash, there will have to be an investigation done and determine who is at fault. And I don't know if this bill will increase or decrease from the one we have per year to 0, which would be great. We do have a lot of bicycle crashes that result in injuries, but not necessarily fatalities. Does that put that number down? I know that that's the reason for the report in there. We'll report a year out, right? And see what happens.
Is this complicated or does it make it easier? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I also would say that in my support of the Bicycle for Every Vermont Kid that's eventually going to, take the world by the state by storm, that education issue on the youth versus an adult riders that are serious, I hadn't thought of until at all. I'm curious. I don't know how to process that exactly, how we could teach some bikers to operate one way and some to operate in another. And that is something I guess I'd have to hear more about. Also, can't help but mention, we spent $21 million plus or more on bike ped projects annually, at least review and planning, but they still don't contribute any money to the transportation fund through any registration fees or purchase and use tax. But they are critically important, and I am in favor of a bike program for everyone. So there's always, everybody in this building tells me how simple it is to change a law because they think their part is simple, and all I find is how incredibly hard it is to do it. There's one more part of your testimony I have to ask about. So when I buy my fireworks and I'm fine in the parking lot, are you saying it's once I pull out, I'm in violation, or only if I light them up, am I in violation?
No. Possession, transportation, use, and storage.
Really? All right. Tell us when you're up.
I didn't strike that last. I didn't hear any of that.
You had your hand up. You're gonna be our last question before we go to adjourn or to a quick break.
Last question. Well, thank you so much for your testimony. And you mentioned that different municipalities can, and some in fact already do have different ordinances around traffic safety for bicycles. Would you say it's more or less safe to have consistent laws or guidelines around bicycle safety across the state versus a patchwork?
Right, and much to the question earlier, I think it's easier to have an umbrella definition of everything, right? That way, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, everyone understands the same thing. That does make it easier. I was just testifying to the fact that there's nothing stopping that from happening currently, right? That can happen right now. It's just that, yes, if everyone, if this were to go into effect into law, troopers and law enforcement officers being trained at the police academy, when they come out of that academy, they're going to understand the new laws. They're going to understand that this is now a new thing. There'll be a legislative change that current law enforcement officers read and say, okay, this is the blanket law change for all current law enforcement officers. All new law enforcement officers would taught that same thing. So if there's one way of doing everything, yes, that's easier, right? It makes sense.
Right. And in terms of safety, I guess, because there was a question raised around, teaching children these rules, but, just thinking about, for example, where I, my district, Winooski, across the bridge in Burlington, it is allowed to use head signals for crossing. So there's kind of already that perhaps safety challenge if children or youth are getting mixed messages in one municipality, they can follow one rule and another. So I just wonder if it actually might be more straightforward to have and safe to have consistent rules that, vulnerable operators can learn and follow in any municipality.
Right. So anything, as I'm sure this committee does, but with any law concerning transportation, you have what we refer to as the 3 E's, right? Engineering, education, and enforcement, right? They have a fourth one called emergency services, but for those 3 pieces, right? Engineering, education, and enforcement. So if we have an engineering kind of the design of the law and the education is robust, the enforcement isn't really all that there. It's not because people are educated on how they're doing it, they're not going to violate the law. So emphasis on education in this piece, that if everyone is taught the same way, you can guess and you can hope that from all that education that everyone is now being safer about it. So you could say that, yes, more education and the one way of doing it could lead to safer operation.
Thank you very much for coming in and for the testimony, and obviously there's lots of questions.
No.
We are adjourned for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very
We
much.
got a 5-minute break.
I will get you the